Hey everybody, we are back with a new startup interview. Get inspired and motivated with Startup Radio Germany.
Hello everybody, this is another English interview with Startuprad.io, your radio for news from the German startup scene. But this time I do have an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley with me. Good morning, Sebastian. You'd like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening to Frankfurt as well. So my name is Sebastian Seger. I am the co-founder and CEO of Consulted, which is a marketplace for business professionals to access industry expertise of their peers on demand.
To be pretty fair to our listeners, we should say two things. The first one is, due to a glitch last time in my software, we do have to do this recording again, so it's a second attempt.
That's correct.
And unfortunately. And the next one is, we do know each other quite well since more than 9 years when we spent time together in China.
Correct.
So it's not a total accident that I do have an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley here in our podcast. So you are doing Consulted. How did you actually end up at Consulted? What kind of CV brought you there?
So that's actually an interesting question, because I believe behind every venture there is an interesting coincidence how it came about. And for me, so I went to business school and I started a very typical career. I started off with management consulting. I worked 4 years with A.T. Kearney. I started off in Dubai, and then I changed to the Silicon Valley office in San Francisco. And what I realized during my consulting career is that there is tremendous value in tapping into the experience of others when it comes to specific business problems. And that sort of laid the foundation for Consulted and for the idea. And myself and my co-founders, one of which also worked at Consulting at McKinsey, we realized that we want to bring this opportunity to tap into the experience to other businesses as well. So for us, we asked ourselves, why is it not even possible today that you can talk to your peers on the phone about problems they may already have encountered and provide some guidance and insights. So that basically laid the foundation for Consulted.
And just to make sure for our listeners, every time we do talk about experience, we mean something like you talk to a person and they ask you a question and you go, oh, never thought about that aspect. Okay. When we talk about experience. And you set up Consulted, and that is also the reason why we're talking English, because you're German, I'm German. But from what I understand, your company language is English. You are located with a headquarters in Silicon Valley. And finally, your main audience, your main customers, your main group of experts are all speaking English, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think the last point, I think, is the most important one, because, businesses globally, maybe with the exception of China, speak English in the day-to-day business. Even let's say the German companies do, or the Spanish or the Latin American companies, right? And because it's inherently global, to tap into experience of others, English makes total sense. And we sort of took this baseline for the decision that we actually have to be in the largest consulting market in the world, which is the US, and have some ties to the second largest, which is the German market as well. That's why we have an office in Berlin too, from the start, and also speak English within the company. So, for example, we have right now 2 interns with us, both only speak English and their native language, obviously, but we are quite global from the start, and I think it's very important to make that a success.
But to make sure to our listeners, you are actually not a consultancy, but you help to get consulting work done. Can you describe a little bit what Consulted actually does?
So I think the easiest way to describe it, it's like Airbnb for consulting, right? We are the matchmaker between somebody who wants to tap into the experience or wants to get a specific question or problem sort of solved or answered, and the expert, so to speak, on the other side, who may have that specific insight or experience. And we are sort of the matchmaker. And how we do that is that we have structured our topics, and think of like if you go to Amazon or eBay, right? So you have different topics, right? So you could have garments, and within garments you have shoes and sweaters and so forth. And what we have is we structured our sort of experiences or knowledge of the experts in over 500 categories. So there are categories around functional knowledge, around industry knowledge, methodological knowledge, and career development knowledge and insights. And what we do is once we onboard a new expert, that expert sort of needs to register by connecting their LinkedIn profile. But after they have done that, they select the hourly rate and go through this list of 500 offerings and select those ones where they can actually provide insight in and write a short note what specifically they can do in those different topics. And
but to make sure your clients already need to know where the problem is. For example, you could not necessarily help a small or medium-sized company that says we are losing revenue. What can we do about it? That would be too general.
That's so the short answer is yes, and the long answer is a bit more elaborate, I would say, because what's actually going on in the industry, especially when you look at larger mid-sized companies or even corporations, you have like three fundamental trends which drive the industry. One is companies are getting smarter. So, for example, compared to 10 years ago, companies now have already a lot of, let's say, project experience, how to do projects or how to approach problems in-house. Why? Because they are hiring MBAs and they are hiring former consultants, investment bankers, and so forth, and they have them on their payroll. And these are the typical set of people which would normally drive internal initiatives in companies. The second trend is that you have more projects vis-a-vis 10 years ago because of the whole uncertainty, the fluctuations in the market, right, the ups and downs. And based on that, planning horizons are much shorter now. And that's why you need to react and be proactive about sort of your company strategy and your company future much more often. And there's a third trend, and that's probably the most interesting one, is that you have also more projects in-house. So companies, they don't really want to outsource everything to some random management consultancy, but they actually want to solve their own problems. And now with the right people, I described in the first trend I talked about, they can actually now attempt to do that. There are obvious benefits to do so. For example, the cost savings they experience by doing it in-house versus outsourcing. But even more importantly, all the learnings you do while conducting a project or solving your own problem is also kept in-house. Now, that being said, there's one crucial thing which is actually missing to successfully solve your own problems and questions. At least some of them you typically would have naturally outsourced to consultancies before. And that is the access to some specific experience or advice. Think of it like this. If you attempt something new, or if you want to crack a new problem, and that's by definition new, you don't have all the insights. And typically companies only have access to a very limited resource set, right? They could ask their colleagues, but they probably also don't have all the insights you would need. They could go on Google and try to find it out there, or they could read some generic reports. But
could we make this a little bit more graphic? Let's say, for example, I want to start a butterfly farm.
All right, so probably the butterfly farm is a company which is a bit smaller. Let's pick an example which would be more typical for a larger company, right? So let's say you're a mid-sized company in southern Germany, and you have sort of your target customer base is in Europe, right? And you want to now expand into China, into the Chinese market. However, you don't have any ties there, right? So how do you go about it? Now, you could obviously outsource this project to a larger consultancy and have 5-6 people come to your offices, stay there for 3-4 months and come back with the answer and pay a lot of money for it. Or you could say, and that's very true for many of those projects or problems where you don't even have the budget or the luxury to hire some outside consultancy, you do it in-house, right? So you would start defining the project plan and setting up all the areas you need to find out, right? So how does the Chinese customer base look like? What do they like? How do they buy? How are the differences to our European market? How do I think about pricing? Where do I start? How do I create some ties with some partners, potential partners in the local market? And some of those questions, very likely you can figure out on your own, but others you just can't. And what you could do right now, as I described earlier, you could talk to some of your colleagues or your consult Google and try to find it out there. But it's very likely not enough and or just takes too long. And that's where Consulted comes in, where you can actually browse through the different experts related to your industry and problem you want to solve. Let's say you have this it's an automotive manufacturer in southern Germany, right? You would go to automotive and then look for pricing experts, for example, in the Chinese market, right? And then you would pick a couple of them and schedule calls. And while doing those calls, you would not actually ask for facts as much as you would ask for experience, because that's where the real value lies. By talking to a couple of those experts, you can have a much better decision base for your decisions you need to make, right? Because they have the insights by just being present in the market for the last 5, 10, 15 years, which you never could accomplish in a very short amount of time, right? So that's how you have to think about it, yeah.
Do you think that Consulted will help by providing such an offering to eat away from the usual consulting market, only for the reason that companies can now do even more in-house projects and they don't need to tap the respective consulting networks out there for expertise, but rather just have a team inside and ask for outside expertise consulted?
I think so, but I think that's probably a shift we see very gradually and maybe over the long run, that you could start to replace at least the more generic offerings of consultancies. But I think where the real value lies is for those projects or for those problems which you wouldn't even think of giving outside at the moment, right? Those ones.
And who would be your customer on the one side of the marketplace who would be seeking that advice? Is it the really big international company? Is it a really tiny startup?
Yeah.
Is it from production, financial services? What does your customer look like?
So the customer can be described in a couple of different ways. So how we look at it is that typically a larger company, it could be a large mid-sized company or it could be a corporation, but not on a global level, so to speak. You actually talk to and target the different project managers and department heads within those companies, because they have those very specific and questions or problems we provide expertise in, or at least our experts do. And that's how you have to think of it. What we don't do is we don't focus on a specific vertical or specific functional area. It's like a marketplace approach like eBay has, right? You can buy almost anything on eBay. And that's how we look at it, right? Because the value is not so much, let's say, even if you're an automotive parts manufacturer, there is value in talking to even a consumer brand in the Chinese market to get some additional proof points or insights. So you don't really have to talk to only within your own vertical, right? So we truly believe there's a lot of value in going cross-border, and that's why we did not focus on any particular vertical.
So basically, your customers are companies that are smaller than multinational corporations, but they are also bigger than the usual startup with 20 employees.
Yeah, so I think they are much bigger than the typical startups. I think you would address companies which are larger than 500 employees and up, right? So that's how you can think of. And even in larger corporations, you have a lot of use cases where this could be very helpful.
Something you could call something like knowledge on call, right?
Pretty much so, right? It's how we say it is that you can tap into the experience of your peers. And that's important for businesses of all sizes. However, we focus on the larger businesses, right?
Have you ever thought to sell the services of consultant, meaning the expert network, also inside multinational companies, for example, for exactly this knowledge on call approach? Have you ever thought about that?
I'm not quite sure whether I fully understand what you meant. What do you mean by inside the companies?
I would see it like something you have your experts inside the project team of a multinational company, and you need some knowledge, and you just can choose them, click on them, and make a doodle, set up a call. Something like they could access just directly from their system so that it looks like it is a service provided by their own company.
Oh, got it. Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So that's definitely on the roadmap that you would want to do some partnership or, let's say, frame agreements with larger companies. So you have company access, which is specifically for a particular company. But I think for right now, we just provide a platform for all companies without sort of putting the internal label on.
I see. And on the one side of the network, there are customers. On the other side of the network or marketplace, there are the expert. How do you actually get the experts? Where are they coming from? And what would be a typical profile for them?
Yeah. So a typical expert profile, let me start with the last question, would be a senior manager who works at, let's say, IBM in the marketing function. And that's actually an actual expert we have on the platform already, or a partner from Accenture, or a pricing lead of Pfizer, for example. Right? So these are very well educated senior managers in Fortune 1000 companies who have been doing what they're doing for at least 5 to 7 years. So they're actually good at what they do. And how do we get to them? It's a very much one-on-one, hands-on approach that you need to find the experts online or by other means, and then you reach out to them on a one-on-one basis to sort of explain, consult to them, and then onboard them onto the platform.
When we talked the first time, we also discussed the problem what to fill first, meaning for a marketplace, you gotta have demand on the one hand side, but you also gotta have offerings on the other side. So how did you approach this problem?
Yeah, it's always a chicken and egg problem, right? So what's first and what you solve for first? I think that's highly dependent on the business model and sort of the underlying economics and incentives of the two sides of the marketplace to target, right? And for us, since the experts sort of can offer their experience and can get some money and some gratification for sharing this, is much easier than finding customers, or sort of the demand side, and matching them with some experts which aren't there. So we always believe that it makes much more sense to go to the expert side first to build up a critical mass in our different service offerings, and then take sort of the full service offerings with experts to potential clients and say, look, if you have a problem in this specific area, you can actually tap into 30, 40, 50 different experts for this very specific problem area to be relevant. And that's the approach we took, right? For other marketplaces, on the other hand, it may be very different. For example, there's this marketplace called Fiverr, where you can buy very small services for $5. For example, you could create a logo, or you could create a slogan, or you can a small poem, and those kind of things for $5. There, you may even be able to offer and to fill the marketplace only with the founder team, and say you can do so many things, and then market it already to the demand side and get the marketplace going like this. For us, this was actually never an option because we have some experience. However, we never have enough experience to cover all our 500 areas of expertise. So you are very much dependent on the different experts we tap into because it's so specific, the problems we solve.
And how did you get your hands on them?
So as I said, it's really like being present in the different online networks, reading some white papers where they actually talk about their content expertise or knowledge expertise, and then try to reach out to them on a one-on-one basis, right? And this day and age is, if you know who you want to reach out to, you actually are able to do so, right? So you really have to get to the names first, and then you can reach them somehow on some level. And how we did that is we said, okay, what would be for example, for one service offering called price and margin management, what are the companies which typically employ price and margin management experts? And then you would sort of try to go over the companies and reach out to those experts.
That sounds to me pretty much like a headhunter would approach
Correct.
Such a thing.
I think that's how you could put it, like a headhunter would.
Now that we understand what you actually do, get a little bit more towards the way you actually set up your company.
Sure.
Okay, and dear my listeners, that will be provided in the second episode of Startuprad.io, interviewing the CEO and co-founder of Consulted, Sebastian Sager.